Everyone already knows how this story is supposed to go. A new team enters Formula One, and the script writes itself. They spend 3 years at the back, lapped and invisible, quietly bleeding money, while they learn lessons the established teams learned decades ago. It's happened to almost everyone who's tried. Build an organization from a blank sheet, hundreds of engineers, an unproven simulator, a trackside crew that's never worked a race together, and the grid punishes you for it. That's the assumption the entire paddock has run on for a decade. New teams start at the back. Everyone knows it. 10 established teams built their entire read of Cadillac around that assumption. And there's a growing suspicion, in the right corners of the paddock, that they got it exactly backwards. Because the thing everyone treats as Cadillac's weakness, that it has no current car, no history, no results to defend, may be the single greatest advantage any new entrant has ever walked in holding. While the rest of the grid was trapped in a fight it couldn't escape, Cadillac spent an entire year doing something none of them were legally allowed to do. If you want to understand why some of the sharpest people in this sport are quietly nervous about a team that hasn't turned a wheel in anger, stay with this and get subscribed. Because the advantage Cadillac holds isn't about money, and it isn't about the badge, it's about time, and the rules handed it to them. To see the shape of that advantage, you have to understand the trap every other team on the grid spent 2025 caught inside. The 2026 regulations are the biggest reset the sport has seen in a generation. New aerodynamics, a radically new power unit, essentially a blank sheet car, and every existing team had to design that car while simultaneously racing the current one. Same budget, same wind tunnel, same engineers. Split, painfully, across 2 completely different machines. Under the cost cap, that split is brutal, because there's only so much money and only so many hours to go around. A hard ceiling on spending that every team hits, no matter how deep its parent company's pockets. You cannot simply throw more cash at both cars because the rules forbid it. So every team faced the same impossible arithmetic. Every pound Ferrari spent chasing a 2025 result was a pound it couldn't spend on 2026. Every hour Mercedes gave to defending its current car was an hour stolen from the future. Every wind tunnel run McLaren used to find a 10th this season was a run it didn't get to bank for the season that actually reshapes the sport. The teams fighting hardest at the front this season are, by definition, the ones bleeding the most resource away from the car that actually matters next. Success now quietly taxes success later. It's a trap with no exit, if you're already on the grid. Cadillac was the one team standing outside it. They had no 2025 car to build, no championship to chase, no points to defend, no crash damage to repair on a Sunday night. When their entry received its final approval, the technical group under people like Nick Chester and Pat Simons, names with deep championship pedigree from their years at Enstone, were handed something no established team could legally give itself: a completely undivided year. Every dollar, every hour of computing time, every engineer's attention, aimed at one single target: the 2026 car. Their rivals split their focus across 2 seasons because the rules forced them to. Cadillac poured everything into one. That's not a small edge. Over a full development year, at the most important design moment in decades, it's an enormous one. Think about what an undivided year actually buys at a moment like this. When the rules change this radically, the early direction you pick, the fundamental philosophy of the floor, the concept of the car, matters more than almost anything you do later, because the whole season's development builds on that first foundation. Get it right early, and everything compounds in your favor. The teams, splitting their attention, were making those foundational calls in stolen hours, between race weekends, with half their minds on Sunday's result. Cadillac's people made them with the whole year, the whole budget, and the whole building pointed at nothing else. That edge compounds too because of a second rule most fans have never heard of. It's called the aerodynamic testing restriction, and it was built to keep the sport close. The principle is simple. The higher you finish in the championship, the less wind tunnel time and simulation you're allowed the following year. Win, and you're handicapped. Finish last, and you're rewarded with the most development running on the grid. It's a sliding scale designed to drag the field back together, and it's calculated off where you finished. For years, this rule has quietly shaped the pecking order, a handicap on the strong that helps the weak claw their way forward, one restricted season at a time. It's the sport's attempt to stop any single team running away forever, but it was written for teams that exist, teams with a finishing position to measure, So ask the obvious question. Where does a team that has never finished a race at all, a team with no championship position whatsoever, sit on that scale? At the very bottom, Cadillac, with no championship position to its name, was classified essentially as an equal last team, which means that going into the single most important aerodynamic reset in modern Formula One, it was handed close to the maximum wind tunnel and simulation allocation the rules permit. The reigning frontrunners, the teams that earned their success, walked into the 2026 design window with the least development time. The newcomer that had achieved nothing walked in with the most. And to use it, Cadillac secured access to a genuine Formula One grade wind tunnel, the Toyota facility in Cologne, Germany, and ran it hard, generating aerodynamic data during the critical design phase that the world champions simply weren't allowed to match. Two advantages, stacked. And here's where the third one hides. Inside the decision, people keep calling Cadillac's biggest mistake. Look at the back of that car, and you'll find a Ferrari engine. Not a General Motors power unit, not an American engine in an American team, backed by one of the largest car makers on Earth. A customer Ferrari unit leased from Maranello, and the critics have been merciless about it, reading it as a lack of ambition, a team that talked big and then rented its most important component. They've got it precisely backwards, and the reason is the coldest strategic thinking in the whole project. Building a brand new car and a brand new engine at the same time, in the hardest technical era the sport has ever produced, is how new projects die. The 2026 power unit, a near 50-50 split between combustion and a massive electrical deployment, is the most complex the sport has ever attempted. To gamble a first-ever chassis on a first-ever engine of that complexity would be to stack two enormous unknowns on top of each other and hope. Cadillac refused the gamble. By taking Ferrari's proven power unit and, with it, the gearbox and rear suspension, it removed an entire half of the problem. When the car runs and something's wrong, the engineers know exactly where not to look. The engine is a known quantity. Every question that remains lives in the aerodynamics, which is the one area Cadillac controls completely, and the one area it spent that undivided year and that maximum allocation perfecting. And the Ferrari deal isn't the destination, it's the scaffolding. Because away from the racing, in North Carolina, General Motors is quietly building its own power unit operation, hiring engine designers, constructing the facility, working toward a proprietary Cadillac engine slated to arrive around 2029. The rented Italian hardware buys the team the years it needs to mature its trackside operation and stabilize its car, while the real weapon is built slowly, out of sight, back home. That same cold pragmatism runs through the choice of who drives. Cadillac didn't chase a marketable young American or a headline name. It signed two 36-year-old veterans, Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas. Men who between them have started over 500 Grand Prix, won races, and, just as importantly, survived broken ones. That wasn't a nostalgia play. A new team in the 2026 era, where active aerodynamics can hide deep mechanical problems behind software behavior, needs drivers who can feel the difference between a car that's genuinely slow and a car that's merely badly set up, and describe it cleanly, lap after lap. Perez and Bottas aren't there to win races in year one. They're there to be a stable reference point, a pair of steady hands feeding back clean data while the young organization around them learns to walk. Every choice in this project points the same way. Remove variables, reduce risk, buy certainty wherever certainty can be bought. Which leaves the piece everyone thought was the punishment, the price of entry. When Formula One finally let the Americans in, it made them pay. A fee of $450 million, split among the 10 existing teams, simply for the right to exist on the grid. The team principals who negotiated that number walked away satisfied, convinced they'd taxed the newcomer so heavily they'd hobbled it before it started. But look at what that number actually buys, set against the alternative. If General Motors had instead tried to buy its way in the traditional route, purchasing an existing midfield team, the price would comfortably have run past $1 billion. And for that billion, it would have inherited someone else's outdated factory, someone else's legacy staff, someone else's compromised car, and ingrained habits. Instead, Cadillac paid a fraction of that, inherited nothing, and built exactly the organization it wanted from the ground up. 3 purpose-built American bases, a British engineering hub, over 500 hand-picked staff, 2 experienced Grand Prix winners in the seats, and a simulator program feeding it clean data. The established teams thought they were charging an outsider a fortune to get in. What they were actually doing was watching that outsider buy the cheapest bespoke entry in modern Formula One history and pocket the difference. Now here's the part the story rarely tells, because it's the part that keeps this honest. None of these advantages guarantees a single point. An undivided year, maximum wind tunnel time, a de-risked engine, capital saved. Every one of them is a head start, not a result. And there are real cracks in the armor. Cadillac's early shakedown running was, by the team's own admission, cautious and slow, the slowest of anyone who ran in that first outing. Splitting an operation across 2 continents and multiple sites, from Indiana to Silverstone to Cologne, cuts against everything modern Formula One has learned about keeping people under one roof. Most dangerous of all, a team with no history has no reference points, no baseline of old data to warn it when something looks brilliant in the tunnel but falls apart on track. That correlation, the match between simulation and reality, is where new teams are quietly broken. Cadillac has bought itself every possible advantage on paper. Paper doesn't run in the wet at Silverstone. So the real tension isn't whether Cadillac has an edge. It plainly does. A structural, rules-granted, genuinely unprecedented edge. The tension is whether an edge built entirely in simulation survives its first contact with a real race weekend. And that's what should keep the established teams looking over their shoulders. They spent a year congratulating themselves on the fee they extracted and the backmarker they assumed they'd created, while a team with no distractions, maximum development running, a de-risked car, and a clean balance sheet was engineering itself specifically for the exact rules they were all scrambling to understand. Maybe it doesn't come together in year 1. Maybe the split sites and the missing history drag it back into the midfield fight, and the veterans spend a season learning the same hard lessons everyone else did. That's the safe bet, and it might be right. But ask yourself, which is the more dangerous miscalculation? Assuming a new team will be slow because new teams are always slow, or being the team that handed a rival a full year of undivided focus and the biggest development allowance on the grid, and only realized what that meant when it was already too late to claw any of it back. So here's what I want to know from you. When the lights go out on Cadillac's first race, do the veterans quietly bank points nobody expected? Or does the lack of a single lap of real history expose everything the simulator couldn't? Tell me where you land in the comments.